The iron wheels of the stagecoach groaned to a halt, spitting dust and gravel across the main street of Red Rock, Wyoming. Lainey Wilder pressed her gloved hand against the fogged window, wiping away condensation to peer at the town that was supposed to be her new beginning. What she saw made her stomach tighten, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the November wind, their facades as gray as the sky above. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough from tobacco and cold air. Lainey gathered her traveling dress, the fabric heavy with 3 days of dust, and descended from the coach. The moment her boots touched the ground, she straightened to her full height, 5 feet and 11 inches, that had been the subject of whispers in every drawing room in New York. Here, she'd hoped, things would be different. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, gave her the same look she'd grown accustomed to. The quick glance up, the widening eyes, the slight step backward. The merchant's wife clutched her husband's arm tighter, as if Lainey's height might be contagious. "Harold Boone," Lainey said to the driver, ignoring the stares. "I'm looking for Harold Boone's ranch." The driver scratched his beard, studying her with curiosity. "Boone's place is about 2 miles north, but he usually meets folks here in town when he's expecting them." He glanced around the empty street. "You expecting him?" "Yes." The word came out more uncertain than she'd intended. 6 months of letters, each one filled with promises of a new life, a partnership on his ranch, a place where her unique qualities would be valued. He'd never asked about her appearance, and she'd never mentioned her height. Perhaps that had been a mistake. The wind cut through her traveling coat, and Lainey pulled her carpetbag closer. Inside were all her worldly possessions: 2 dresses, her mother's silver brush, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the bundle of Harold's letters tied with blue ribbon. Letters that had painted a picture of wide skies and honest work, of a man who valued character over New York society's shallow conventions. "There's the hotel," the driver said, pointing to a 2-story building with peeling paint. "Might want to wait inside. This wind's got teeth." Lainey nodded her thanks and made her way across the rutted street. The few townsfolk visible hurried past, heads down against the cold, but not before shooting glances her way. A woman sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store stopped mid-motion, broom suspended, mouth slightly open. The hotel lobby smelled of coal smoke and boiled coffee. A thin man behind the desk looked up from his ledger, did the familiar double-take, and forced a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Help you, miss. I'd like to inquire about Harold Boone. Has he been in town today?" The clerk's expression shifted. "Boone. He was here earlier. Matter of fact, left about an hour ago." "Did he say if he'd return?" "Can't say he did." The clerk studied her more carefully now. "You, the lady from back east. The one he's been writing to." Heat crept up Lainey's neck. "Yes." "Huh." The single syllable carried weight. "Well, he was here. Saw him talking to Doc Emmett. Then he headed out. Looked a mite troubled, if you don't mind my saying." The heat in her neck turned cold. "Troubled." "Just an observation." The clerk returned to his ledger, suddenly absorbed in columns of figures. Lainey stood at the desk, uncertain. The coach had already departed, wheels clattering away down the street. She had $17 to her name, enough for a few nights' lodging and meals if she was careful. But she'd come here for a future, not a hotel room. "Perhaps I'll wait outside," she said, "in case he returns." The clerk shrugged without looking up. She positioned herself on a bench near the hotel entrance, where she could watch the street in both directions. The cold seeped through her coat, her dress, settling into her bones. An hour passed, then another. The few people who ventured out gave her wide berth, whispering to each other once they'd passed. Finally, as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting Red Rock in purple shadows, she saw him. Harold Boone rode in from the north, his horse's breath clouding in the cold air. Even from a distance, She recognized him from the small photograph he'd sent. Square jaw, dark hair, the kind of solid build that spoke of hard work. Lainey stood, smoothing her skirts, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the moment she'd traveled 2,000 miles for. She raised her hand in greeting. Harold saw her. His horse slowed, then stopped completely in the middle of the street. For a long moment, he simply stared. Then he dismounted, leading his horse forward with slow, measured steps. As he drew closer, Lainey watched his expression change. The anticipation she'd expected to see there curdled into something else. Dismay, disappointment when he stopped before her. She had to look down slightly to meet his eyes. He was perhaps 5 feet 8 inches in his boots. "Miss Wilder?" His voice was different from what she'd imagined. Tighter, strained. "Mr. Boone." She extended her hand. "I'm so pleased to finally—" "You're tall." The words cut through her greeting like a blade. Her hand dropped. Yes." He walked a slow circle around her, as if appraising livestock at auction. Lainey forced herself to remain still, though every muscle screamed at her to flee. "You didn't mention you were tall." "You didn't ask." The words came out sharper than intended. Harold's jaw tightened. A man assumes certain things, natural things. A woman should be. He gestured vaguely at the air somewhere around his shoulder. "Proper height? Delicate. How's a wife supposed to look up at her husband if she's towering over him like a—" He cut himself off, color rising in his cheeks. "Like a what?" Lainey's voice had gone very quiet. "This won't work." Harold took a step back, shaking his head. "I need a wife, not a spectacle. What would people say? What would the other ranchers think when I show up to socials with you? I'd be a laughingstock." Each word landed like a physical blow. Lainey had heard variations of this speech before from her former fiancé in New York, from her mother's friends, from men who'd courted her until they'd stood beside her in daylight. But somehow, after all those letters, after traveling so far on hope alone, this cut deeper. "Your letters said you wanted a partner," she said, hating how her voice trembled. "Someone strong enough for ranch life." Strong in spirit, not. He waved at her again. "You're not what I ordered." "Ordered," the word tasted bitter, like goods from a catalog. Harold's face darkened. "Now don't go twisting my words. I was clear about wanting a proper wife. Someone who'd fit in, make a good impression. You think the church ladies are going to welcome you? Think the other wives will want their husbands standing next to you at barn dances?" He shook his head again. "No, ma'am. This was a mistake. My mistake for not asking, yours for not telling." He turned to go, then paused. "Stage comes through again in 3 days. Best you head back where you came from. Find yourself a man who, well, find what suits you, but it ain't here, and it ain't me." Lainey stood frozen as he mounted his horse and rode away, not looking back. The street had emptied, but she could feel eyes watching from windows, could imagine the whispers already starting. The woman who'd come all this way only to be rejected in the middle of Main Street. Too tall, too much, not the right kind of woman. The wind picked up, driving ice crystals against her face. She had nowhere to go, no one expecting her, and barely enough money to survive until the next stage. The hotel would be full of curious eyes and barely concealed snickers. Her trunk sat by the depot, holding everything she owned, waiting for a destination she no longer had. Lainey picked up her carpet bag and began walking, not sure where, just away from the hotel and its thin clerk, away from the bench where she'd waited with such foolish hope. At the edge of town stood a small church, its paint weathered away, door hanging askew. No lamp burned in its windows. Abandoned. Like her. She climbed the 3 wooden steps and tried the door. It opened with a protest of rusty hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in the fading light through a broken window. A few pews remained, scarred and weathered. At least here, the walls blocked the wind. Lainey sank onto the front pew, her traveling dress pooling around her. She was 26 years old, tall enough to look most men in the eye, strong enough to work alongside any of them. And apparently, that made her unsuitable for love, unsuitable for the life everyone else seemed to find so easily. She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that tears changed nothing about her height, nothing about the way the world saw her. Instead, she sat in that broken church as darkness fell over Red Rock, Wyoming, wondering if there was anywhere in this vast country where a woman like her could simply belong. The cold crept in through the broken window, through the gaps in the walls, settling around her like a familiar companion. At least the cold didn't care how tall she was. At least the coming night would hide her from curious eyes. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what came next. Tonight, she'd sit here in this abandoned place, 2,000 miles from home, holding the shattered pieces of yet another dream. The letters in her carpet bag seemed to mock her all those promises of a different life, a place where she'd be valued for who she was rather than rejected for how she looked. Harold Boone would sleep warm in his ranch house tonight, probably congratulating himself on avoiding a mistake. And Lainey Wilder would sit here in the cold, in a town that had already decided she didn't belong, waiting for a morning that promised nothing but the same judgments she'd traveled so far to escape. The cold had settled deep in Lainey's bones by the time she'd heard footsteps on the church's wooden steps. She'd been sitting there for hours, watching darkness creep through the broken windows, trying not to think about tomorrow, or the next day, or all the days after that. Her fingers had gone numb despite her gloves, and her breath clouded in the air like smoke from a dying fire. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, not the hurried gait of someone passing by, but the measured tread of someone who meant to come inside. The door creaked open, and Lainey tensed, ready to explain herself, to apologize for trespassing, to face whatever judgment awaited. A man filled the doorway, his shoulders broad enough to block what little moonlight filtered in from outside. He was tall, taller than her, she realized with a start. It had been so long since she'd had to look up at anyone that the sensation felt foreign. He wore a long coat of worn sheepskin, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. For a moment, neither spoke. He stood there, taking in the scene, a woman alone in an abandoned church, sitting in the near darkness with her carpetbag clutched close. Then he stepped inside, his boots echoing on the warped floorboards. "Cold night to be sitting in a church with no heat," he said. His voice was deep, quiet, like distant thunder. Lainey straightened her spine, a lifetime of training keeping her posture perfect even in defeat. "I'm not disturbing anyone." "Didn't say you were." He moved closer, and the moonlight caught his face, strong features weathered by sun and wind, dark hair that needed cutting, eyes that seemed to take in everything and give away nothing. He might have been 30 or 40 hard-living aged men differently out here. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. A bitter laugh escaped before she could stop it. "No, not anymore." He nodded as if that made perfect sense, as if women regularly sat alone in abandoned churches at night with nowhere to go. He reached into his coat and withdrew something, a flask. Instead of drinking, he unscrewed the cap and held it out to her. "It's coffee," he said when she hesitated. "Still warm, or was an hour ago." The simple kindness of it nearly undid her. She accepted the flask with stiff fingers, the metal barely warm but warmer than her hands. The coffee was black, bitter, with a hint of something that might have been chicory. It traced a path of heat down her throat. "Thank you," she managed. He moved to sit on the pew across the aisle from her, not too close, but close enough that she could see him clearly. Everything about him spoke of solitude, the worn places on his coat where no one had mended them, the careful way he moved as if used to having only himself for company. "Train comes through in 3 days," he said after a moment. "Hotels are warmer than churches." "Hotels cost money." "Soda's freezing to death. Different kind of cost, though." She looked at him then. Really looked. His face was impassive, but there was something in his eyes, not pity, which she would have hated, but understanding. as if he'd sat in his own cold places, waiting for dawn. "You from around here?" she asked, mainly to fill the silence. "Near enough. Got a place outside town. Raise cattle, some horses." He paused. "You're the woman who came to meet Harold Boone." Heat flooded her face, so everyone knew already. The tall woman from back east who'd been rejected in the middle of Main Street. News travels fast. "Small town," he shrugged. "Harold's a fool." The simple statement hung in the air between them. No elaboration, no false comfort, just a judgment rendered and done with. "You don't know me," Laney said quietly. Maybe he saw something that made him realize. "I know he spent 6 months writing letters to get you here. No, he took one look and decided you didn't fit his picture. Man who judges that quick isn't looking for a partner. He's looking for decoration." The accuracy of it stung. She took another sip of coffee to avoid responding. "Name's Colt Mercer," he said after a moment. "Laney Wilder." He nodded as if filing the information away. Then he stood, and she thought he was leaving, but instead he moved to one of the broken windows, studying the street beyond. "Temperature's dropping," he said. "Snow coming in tonight? Maybe tomorrow. This building's got gaps you could throw a cat through. You stay here, they'll find you frozen come morning." "I'll manage." He turned to look at her, and for the first time, something like amusement flickered across his features. "Pride's a fine thing, Miss Wilder. Keeps the spine straight, but it makes a poor blanket." She had no answer for that. Pride was all she had left, and even that was wearing thin. "I've got a wagon outside," he continued, "heading back to my place. Got a fireplace that works and walls that keep the wind out. Even got cornbread from yesterday." He paused. "You can hate the charity of it all you want, but you'll hate it warm instead of freezing." "Why?" The question came out harsher than intended. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. I could be anyone." "Could be," he agreed. "But you're not. You're a woman who traveled 2,000 miles on a promise that turned to dust. Now you're sitting in a cold church trying to figure out how to survive on $17 and wounded dignity." She stared at him. "How did you—" "Same way I know Harold Boone's a fool. I pay attention." He moved back toward the door, then stopped. "Offer stands. Warm house, food, and no questions you don't want to answer. You can figure out your next move without worrying about freezing. Or you can sit here with your pride. Your choice." He said it like he was offering something as simple as the time of day. No weight to it, no expectation, just a practical solution to a practical problem. Somehow that made it easier to consider. I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." People will talk. A woman staying with a man who isn't her husband? People talk anyway. Let them. He pulled his collar up against the cold. "I'll be outside with the wagon. You've got 5 minutes to decide before I head home. Either way, no hard feelings." He left then, boots echoing on the steps. Laney sat in the sudden silence, the flask of coffee growing cold in her hands. Through the broken window, she could see him moving around a wagon, checking the horses' harnesses with practiced movements. 5 minutes to decide between pride and survival, between freezing in righteous solitude and accepting help from a stranger. Back in New York, the choice would have been clear propriety above all, appearances maintained at any cost. But New York was 2,000 miles away, and propriety hadn't kept her warm when Harold Boone looked at her like she was a mistake to be corrected. She thought about tomorrow, about trying to find work in a town that had already judged her, about stretching $17 until the next stagecoach, assuming she even wanted to leave, about all the cold churches and abandoned buildings between here and wherever she might go next. The coffee had gone completely cold by the time she stood. Her legs protested, stiff from sitting so long in the freezing air. She gathered her carpet bag, took one last look at the broken sanctuary that had been her refuge, and walked outside. Colt Mercer stood by his wagon, running a hand along his horse's neck. He looked up when the door creaked open but didn't say anything, didn't smile in triumph or nod in approval. He simply moved to the back of the wagon and held out a hand to help her up. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. His grip was calloused, steady, and he lifted her into the wagon bed as if she weighed nothing at all. He'd laid out horse blankets over the hay, creating a space that, while not comfortable, was better than church pews. "Cold ride," he said, "but warmer than walking." She settled herself among the blankets as he moved to the driver's seat. The wagon lurched into motion, wheels creaking over the frozen ground. As they passed through town, Lainey caught glimpses of lit windows, families gathered around dinner tables, lives proceeding in their ordinary patterns. Tomorrow, those same people would have something new to gossip about the tall woman from back east who'd left town with Colt Mercer. Let them talk, as he'd said. They'd talk anyway. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open country bathed in moonlight. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants against the star-filled sky. Despite the cold, despite everything, Lainey found herself breathing deeper. The air out here was different, cleaner, sharper, free of the close walls and closer minds of town. "Thank you," she said, though the wind might have carried the words away. If Colt heard her, he gave no sign. He drove on in silence, shoulders steady against the cold, leading them into the vast darkness of the Wyoming night, toward shelter, toward warmth, toward a respite from judgment. For the first time since Harold Boone had looked at her with such disappointment, Lainey allowed herself to hope that morning might bring something better than mere survival. The stranger who'd offered her refuge hadn't looked away, hadn't stepped back, hadn't measured her against some invisible standard and found her wanting. He'd simply offered her a warm fire and cornbread, as if that were the most natural thing in the world, as if a woman's worth had nothing to do with how far up she stood, and everything to do with how far she'd traveled to find a place where she belonged. The cabin emerged from the darkness like something grown from the earth itself, log walls weathered silver by seasons, a stone chimney already threading smoke into the star-filled sky. It wasn't large, but it looked solid, permanent, as if it had been standing there since the mountains themselves were young. Colt brought the wagon to a halt near a small lean-to that served as a stable. An old dog, gray around the muzzle, lifted his head from the porch and thumped his tail twice before settling back to sleep. "That's Blue," Colt said, climbing down from the driver's seat. "He's particular about who he greets. Consider yourself welcomed." He helped Lainey down from the wagon bed, his hands careful and impersonal. The ground felt strange after hours of swaying motion, and she had to steady herself against the wagon's side. "Go on inside," he said, already moving to unhitch the horses. "Door's not locked. Never saw the need." The idea of an unlocked door seemed as foreign as everything else about this place. In New York, locks were necessary as breathing. Here, apparently, trust was currency enough. The door opened on leather hinges, revealing a single room that served as everything: kitchen, living space, bedroom curtained off in one corner. But what struck Lainey first was the warmth. Real warmth. Not the memory of it or the hope for it, but actual heat radiating from a stone fireplace where logs crackled and sparked. She stood just inside the doorway, carpetbag clutched in both hands, taking it in. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, a table and 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves holding dishes and preserves and books. Books everywhere. Actually, stacked on surfaces, lined on shelves, piled in corners. Whatever else Colt Mercer was, he was a reader. "You can set your bag down." His voice came from behind her. "Floor's clean enough." She turned to find him carrying an armload of split wood, which he stacked neatly by the fireplace. Blue had followed him in, tail wagging slowly, and now came to investigate Lainey with a cold nose and gentle eyes. "Coffee first or food?" Colt asked, shrugging out of his coat. Coffee, please." He moved to the stove with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. Everything he did was like that: deliberate, efficient, no wasted effort. While the coffee heated, he carved thick slices from a pan of cornbread and set them on plates. "Chairs are more comfortable than they look," he said, gesturing to the table. Lainey sat, still feeling like she might need to bolt at any moment. But the chair was comfortable, worn smooth by use, and the heat from the fireplace reached even here. Blue settled at her feet with a contented sigh. Colt set a mug in front of her, real coffee this time, hot enough to steam, with actual sugar in a small bowl nearby. The cornbread was still faintly warm, dense and slightly sweet. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked, sitting across from her with his own mug. She had to think. "Yesterday, before the stage left Cheyenne." He nodded and cut another slice of cornbread, setting it on her plate without comment. They ate in silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't demanding either. Just two people sharing a meal because people needed to eat. "I should explain," Lainey began, but he held up a hand. "Nothing to explain. You needed help. I offered. Simple as that." "It's not simple. People will. I don't much care what people will." He took a sip of coffee. "My nearest neighbor is 5 miles off. Town's a 40-minute ride. What people think reaches about as far as their gossip, and that stops at my property line. You don't get lonely." "Didn't say that." He glanced at the books stacked everywhere. "But there's different kinds of company. Some better than others." After they'd eaten, he showed her around the small space with the same practical efficiency. "Wash basins there, privies out back, take the lantern if you go at night, extra blankets in that chest." He paused at the curtained corner. "You'll sleep here. I'll take the barn." "I can't take your bed." "You can and will. Hay's warm enough, and I've slept in worse places." His tone didn't invite argument. "There's a bar for the door if you feel the need. Never used it myself, but it works." The bed was simple, a wooden frame with rope supports, a straw mattress covered in worn but clean quilts. After weeks of train seats and coach benches, it looked like luxury. "I'll get your trunk from town tomorrow," he said. "For tonight, there's a nightshirt in that drawer that'll swim on you, but it's clean." He moved to gather blankets from the chest, and Lainey found herself studying him in the lamplight. Everything about him seemed designed for solitude, the way he moved through his space without expecting to accommodate anyone else. The single plate and mug he'd had to find extras of. The narrow bed meant for one. "Why do you live alone?" The question escaped before she could catch it. He paused, arms full of blankets. "Same reason you're here, I suppose. Sometimes what the world offers and what you're willing to accept don't match up." Before she could ask what he meant, he'd headed for the door. "Bank the fire before you sleep. Gets cold toward morning otherwise. Blue will stay inside if you want the company." Mr. Mercer." "Colt." He turned back briefly. "Nobody's called me Mr. Mercer since my father died." "Colt." The name felt strange on her tongue. "I need to know why you're doing this. Men don't just help women without expecting something." He considered that, standing in the doorway with winter peering in around him. "You're right, most don't." He shifted the blankets in his arms. "My mother stood 5'10" in her bare feet, in a town where the average woman was lucky to clear 5'2". She spent her whole life trying to shrink herself down to fit their expectations, curved her shoulders, bent her knees, wore shoes that hurt just because they were flat." His voice had gone distant, looking at something beyond the cabin walls. "Died at 43, looking like she was 60. Doctor said it was her lungs, but I knew better. It was all that shrinking, all that making herself smaller so others could feel bigger." He met Lainey's eyes then. "So, when I saw you tonight, sitting straight-backed in that church, cold as death but not bending an inch, figured maybe the world owed you one night of warmth where you didn't have to apologize for the space you take up." The words hung between them like a bridge across deep water. Lainey's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "That's all this is," he continued. "A warm place to sleep and time to figure out your next move. No debts, no expectations, just one tall person helping another. He left then, pulling the door shut behind him. Lainey sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what had just happened. In all her 26 years, no one had ever looked at her height as anything but a flaw to be corrected or endured. And here was this stranger, offering her shelter specifically because she stood tall. She changed into the nightshirt he'd mentioned. It did indeed swim on her, falling nearly to her ankles. But it was soft from countless washings and smelled of soap and cedar. Blue padded over and curled up on the rug beside the bed, sighing contentedly. The fire crackled in the grate as Lainey slipped between sheets that smelled of winter air and wood smoke. Through the single window, stars wheeled overhead, more than she'd ever seen in New York's gas-lit nights. Somewhere in the barn, Colt Mercer was bedding down in hay because he'd given his bed to a stranger he'd helped not despite her height, but because of it. For the first time since Harold Boone had looked at her with such disappointment, Lainey felt something inside her unclench. Just a little, just enough to breathe properly. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: what to do, where to go, how to survive. But tonight, she was warm. Tonight, she was safe. Tonight, she didn't have to make herself smaller. She thought about Colt's mother, dying young from a lifetime of hunching. Thought about all the ways women made themselves less to make men feel like more. Her own mother had been the same constant reminders to slouch at parties, to sit as soon as possible, to never wear her hair too high. Men need to feel protective, dear. She'd say, how can they protect someone who doesn't need it? But maybe that was the wrong question. Maybe the right question was why protection had to come from making yourself weak. Why strength in a woman was something to hide rather than celebrate. Blue lifted his head and whined softly, and Lainey realized she'd been crying. Not the desperate tears of earlier, but something cleaner. Grief for all the women who'd made themselves smaller, anger for all the times she'd tried to do the same, and gratitude, unexpected. Overwhelming gratitude for a taciturn cowboy who'd seen her height not as a flaw, but as a reason to help. She reached down and stroked Blue's graying head. He's unusual, your master. Blue's tail thumped agreement. Through the window, she could see a faint light from the barn. She wondered if Colt was reading by lantern light, surrounded by the warmth of horses and hay. Wondered what kind of life led a man to choose such solitude. Wondered if he ever let anyone pass that careful distance he maintained. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Lainey pulled the quilts higher and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd have to make decisions. Tomorrow she'd have to face the reality of her situation. But tonight, in a stranger's bed in a cabin at the edge of nowhere, she was just Lainey. Not too tall, not too much, not a disappointment or a curiosity or a problem to be solved. Just a woman who'd traveled far and found, in the most unexpected place, a moment of simple human kindness. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and bringing the promised snow. But inside, the fire burned steady. Blue snored softly. And somewhere in the barn, a man who understood the weight of standing tall kept his own quiet watch through the long Wyoming night. Morning came with the sound of an axe biting into wood. Lainey woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar warmth and comfort. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was, then memory rushed back. Wyoming, the abandoned church, Colt Mercer's quiet kindness. Through the frosted window, she could see him in the early light, splitting logs with steady, rhythmic swings. His breath clouded in the cold air, and frost glittered on the shoulders of his work shirt. Blue sat nearby, watching with the patience of a dog who'd witnessed this routine 1,000 times before. Lainey rose and dressed quickly in her traveling clothes, wishing she had something fresher. Her trunk with her other belongings still sat at the depot in town, waiting like everything else in her life, suspended between what was and what might be. The smell of coffee drew her to the kitchen area. A pot sat warming on the stove, and beside it, a note in careful handwriting. Biscuits in the warming oven, preserve jars on the middle shelf. She poured herself coffee and retrieved the biscuits, golden and flaky, better than anything she'd managed in her entire life of attempted domesticity. The preserves were blackberry, tart and sweet. She ate standing by the window, watching Colt work. He moved with the same deliberate efficiency she'd noticed last night, but there was something almost meditative in the repetition. Lift, swing, split, stack the wood, position another log, begin again. No wasted motion, no hurry, just the steady progress of necessary work. When he finally came inside, bringing cold air and the smell of fresh-cut pine, Laney was washing the dishes. "You don't need to do that," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "I do, actually." She kept her back to him, focusing on scrubbing a plate that was already clean. "I need to do something. I can't just exist here." "Why not?" The question made her turn. He was unwinding a scarf from around his neck, his expression genuinely curious. "Because that's not how the world works. People earn their keep. They contribute. They don't just take charity." He poured himself coffee, then leaned against the wall, studying her. "Let me ask you something. You ever watch birds?" The change of subject threw her. "Birds. Birds. You watch them. You'll notice something. When a storm's coming, they share shelter. Don't matter if it's a crow or a sparrow or a hawk. They huddle together in whatever lee they can find until the weather passes. No bird ever says to another, 'You can't shelter here unless you bring twigs.' People aren't birds." "No," he agreed. "Birds are smarter about some things." He drained his coffee and set the mug aside. "You want to contribute? That's fine. Can you read?" "Of course I can read." He gestured to the books stacked everywhere. "Been meaning to organize those for 3 winters now. Never seem to get to it. You could sort them, if you're needing something to do." It was make work. She knew. A kindness disguised as a task. But she found herself nodding anyway. They worked in companionable silence through the morning, him outside continuing his woodpile, her inside trying to make sense of his library. The books were eclectic poetry next to agricultural manuals, Shakespeare sharing space with veterinary guides, cheap novels jumbled with philosophy. Many had notes in the margins, the same careful handwriting as the morning's note. "You've read all of these?" she asked when he came in to warm up. "Most. Long winters out here. Man needs something to keep his mind occupied." She held up a volume of Whitman, heavily annotated. "Poetry." A faint color touched his weathered cheeks. "Words matter. How they're put together. What they make you see." He cleared his throat. "Speaking of seeing, need to head to town today. Get your trunk. Supplies for the week." "I should come. It's my trunk." "You could." He pulled on his coat. "Or you could stay here, where it's warm and nobody's staring." The kindness of it, the understanding, made her throat tight. "They'll stare at you, asking questions about the woman at your place." "Let them." He settled his hat on his head. "Answer's simple enough. You needed help. I helped. End of story." But it wouldn't be the end of the story, and they both knew it. In a town like Red Rock, stories grew in the telling until they bore no resemblance to truth. After he left, Laney tried to focus on the books, but her mind kept circling back to her situation. She had $17, no prospects, and was depending on the charity of a stranger. Back in New York, she'd at least had her needlework to fall back on, mending and alterations for society ladies who valued her skill, if not her company. But here, she was standing at the window, watching snow fall in thick, lazy flakes, when Blue suddenly raised his head and growled. A moment later, hoofbeats sounded outside. Through the frost-glazed glass, she saw a rider approaching. Not Colt, this man was smaller, bundled in a city coat inappropriate for the weather. Her stomach dropped as she recognized him. Harold Boone. She thought about not answering his knock, but Blue was already barking, making silence impossible. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door part way. "Miss Wilder." Harold touched his hat brim, snow gathering on his shoulders. Heard you were staying out here. News does travel fast. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Folks are talking about you, about Mercer. It ain't proper. Since when is helping someone improper? You know what I mean. He shifted his weight, not quite meeting her eyes. People are saying things about what must be going on out here. A woman like you, staying with a man who ain't her husband. A woman like me, ice edged her voice. You mean a woman too tall for your taste? Color flooded his face. That ain't look. I came out here to do the right thing. I'll marry you. Quick ceremony. Make things proper. You can't stay out here with him. It ain't decent. Laney stared at him. Yesterday he'd looked at her like she was a mistake. Now he wanted to marry her to save her reputation or his conscience. No. What? No, Mr. Boone. I don't want to marry you. His face darkened. You'd rather be his whore than my wife. The ugly word hung in the cold air between them. Before Laney could respond, Blue burst past her, snarling. Harold stumbled backward, hands raised. Call him off. I don't think he likes that word. Laney said calmly. Neither do I. This is a mistake. Harold backed toward his horse, Blue hurting him with bared teeth. You're making a mistake. No decent man will have you after this. You'll be ruined. Then I'll be ruined on my own terms. He mounted clumsily, sawing at the reins. When Mercer gets tired of you and he don't come crying to town, we don't need your kind. He spurred his horse harder than necessary, sending the animal lurching through the snow. Blue chased him to the property edge, then trotted back, tail wagging proudly. Good boy, Laney murmured, scratching behind his ears. She was still standing in the doorway when Colt returned an hour later, her trunk secured in the wagon bed. He took in her expression, the tracks in the snow, Blue's defensive posture. Boone was here. It wasn't a question, she nodded. What did he want? To marry me, save my reputation. Colt's laugh was short and humorless. Man won't claim you in daylight but wants to wed you to stop gossip. Sounds about right. He began unloading her trunk. What did you tell him? No. Good. They wrestled the trunk inside together. It looked out of place in the simple cabin, its brass fittings and monogrammed leather speaking of a different life. Laney ran her fingers over the initials LMW, Laney Marie Wilder. The woman she'd been seemed like a stranger now. I should tell you what he said, what people are saying. Don't need to. Colt straightened, brushing snow from his sleeves. I know what they're saying. Same thing they always say when someone doesn't follow their rules. Doesn't it bother you? He considered this, then moved to build up the fire. You know what bothers me? Hypocrisy. Cruelty dressed up as concern. Small minds making small judgments. He added a log to the flames. That bothers me. Words from those kinds of people, just noise. He stood, brushing bark from his hands. Something else has been bothering me. Though, this morning, working outside, he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. You asked me what you feared most, coming here. You said it was the first night, being unwanted. Laney felt heat rise to her face. I shouldn't have said that. No, you were honest. Nothing wrong with honesty. He met her eyes. Just wanted you to know you're not unwanted here. This place, it's been too quiet too long. Having someone to make coffee for. Someone who sorts books and stands up to fools like Boone. That's not charity. Miss Wilder, that's just good sense. The words were simple, practical, so very Colt, but they eased something in her chest that had been tight since Harold's visit. Laney, she said softly, if I'm going to stay here, ruin my reputation, and scandalize the town, you should at least call me Laney. For the first time since she'd met him, Colt Mercer truly smiled. It transformed his weathered face, revealing the younger man beneath the solitude. "All right then, Laney, welcome home." The word hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Home, not permanent, maybe not forever, but for now. For this suspended moment between her old life and whatever came next, it was enough. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in clean white silence. Inside, the fire crackled, Blue dozed, and two tall people who'd spent their lives looking for somewhere to fit found, perhaps, that they'd been looking in the wrong places all along. Saturday arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Laney had been at the cabin 5 days now, falling into an easy rhythm with Colt that felt both natural and strange. He rose before dawn to tend the animals. She made breakfast. He worked outside. She organized his chaotic household. They ate together, read in the evenings, spoke in comfortable fragments that somehow said more than long conversations. But Saturday meant town. Saturday meant the weekly market where ranchers bought supplies and sold goods. And Colt needed things: flour, salt, coffee, grain for the horses. "You don't have to come," he said over breakfast, but they both knew she couldn't hide forever. "I need thread," she said, "and fabric. If they have it, I found your mending pile." He glanced at the basket she'd discovered, full of shirts with torn seams and trousers with ripped knees. Been meaning to get to that. For how long? Year, maybe 2. She shook her head, smiling despite her nerves. "I'm coming to town." The ride in was quiet, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Laney wore her best dress, the deep blue wool that had seemed so fine in New York but now felt overdressed for a frontier town. She'd pinned her hair carefully, determined to face whatever waited with dignity and tact. As they reached the outskirts of Red Rock, her resolve wavered. People were already gathering for market day, ranchers with their wagons, townswomen in small groups, children darting between the stalls despite the cold, all familiar to each other, all belonging in a way she didn't. "Remember," Colt said quietly, "you've got as much right to be here as anyone." But rights and reality were different things. The moment they entered the main street, the whispers started. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes tracked their progress with avid curiosity. Laney kept her gaze forward, spine straight, but she could feel each stare like a physical touch. Colt pulled the wagon up near the general store. As he helped her down, his hand lingered on her elbow, not possessive, just steady, present. "I'll get the grain loaded," he said. "Meet you at Thompson's in an hour." Thompson's was the dry goods store. She nodded, understanding he was giving her space to shop without him hovering, protecting her dignity even as he protected her safety. The bell above Thompson's door seemed abnormally loud when she entered. "Mrs. Thompson," a narrow woman with sharp features, looked up from her ledger. Her professional smile faltered when she saw who it was. "Help you." The words were correct, but the tone was all wrong, thin, suspicious. "I need thread, black and white, and fabric if you have it." "Mrs." Thompson moved to fetch the thread with obvious reluctance, as if Laney might contaminate her shop simply by being there. Other customers, 2 women examining ribbons, had stopped pretending to shop and were openly staring. "That's her," one whispered, not quietly enough. "The one staying with Colt Mercer." "Shameful," the other replied, bold as brass, walking in here like nothing's wrong. Laney's hands clenched in her skirts, but she kept her voice level. "How much is the blue calico?" $3 a yard. "Mrs." Thompson's voice was flat. It was robbery calico, shouldn't cost more than 50 cents, but Laney understood. This was the price of scandal. The tax on impropriety. "I'll take 2 yards. She paid without complaint, though it ate into her precious reserves. As Mrs. Thompson wrapped the purchases, the shop door opened again. Laney steeled herself for more whispers, more judgment. Instead, a small woman entered barely 5 feet tall, with work-worn hands and a face weathered by sun and hardship. She looked at Laney, then at Mrs. Thompson, then back at Laney. "You're the seamstress?" she asked directly. Laney blinked. Yes. "Good. I'm Sarah Winters. Got 5 children and a husband who's hard on clothes. Heard you were taking in mending. Where did you hear that?" "Colt Mercer mentioned it to my husband. Said you had skill with a needle." Sarah studied her with practical eyes. "I can't pay city prices, but I pay fair. You interested?" Behind the counter, Mrs. Thompson made a disapproving sound. Sarah ignored her. "Yes," Laney said, voice steadier now. "Yes, I'm interested." "Good. I'll bring a basket by tomorrow. Live out past Colt's place, so it's no trouble." She turned to Mrs. Thompson. "I need salt and sugar. And don't you dare charge me $3 for calico if I ask for it." Laney left the shop feeling oddly lighter. One ally might not change everything, but it was a start. She found Colt loading sacks of grain, his movements efficient despite the weight. A small crowd had gathered near the blacksmith's, and she could see Harold Boone among them, gesturing animatedly. "Trouble?" she asked quietly. "Just talk." But his jaw was tight. "Let's finish up." They made their way through the market stalls, Colt's presence beside her creating a small bubble of space. Some vendors served them normally. Money was money, after all. Others were cold, curt, prices suddenly higher than marked. At the vegetable stand, an older woman looked Laney up and down with obvious disdain. "Don't serve her kind," she announced loudly. "What kind is that?" Colt's voice was dangerously quiet. The woman's mouth worked soundlessly, caught between her desire to insult and her fear of Colt's reputation. He might live quiet, but everyone knew Colt Mercer wasn't a man to cross. "Come on," Laney murmured, tugging his sleeve. "It doesn't matter." "It does," he said, but he let her lead him away. They were almost back to the wagon when Harold Boone detached himself from his group, stride purposeful and face flushed with more than cold. "Mercer," he called. "A word." Colt finished securing a sack before turning. "Say it. This arrangement of yours, it ain't right, ain't decent." "Arrangement?" Colt's voice was mild as milk. "You mean giving shelter to someone you left stranded in a snowstorm?" Harold's flush deepened. "I offered to make it right. She refused." "After you rejected her for being tall." The words dropped like stones into still water. "Man judges a woman by her height instead of her character doesn't get to lecture about what's right." "You don't understand." "I understand plenty." Colt stepped closer, using his own height to advantage. Harold had to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. "I understand you wrote to her for months, made promises, let her travel 2,000 miles, then took one look and decided she didn't fit your picture." "A man has preferences. A man has obligations. You created expectations, then walked away because meeting them might make you look small." Colt's laugh was humorless. Know what's really small caring more about inches than integrity? A crowd was gathering, drawn by the confrontation. Laney saw Sarah Winters among them, arms crossed, watching with interest. "She's making a fool of you," Harold said desperately. "Can't you see that woman like that? She's using you for shelter, for protection. Soon as something better comes along—" "Harold," Laney stepped forward, surprising everyone, including herself. "Stop!" All eyes turned to her. She felt the weight of their stares but didn't flinch. "You want to know what kind of woman I am?" Her voice carried clearly in the cold air. "I'm the kind who kept every letter you wrote, who believed your promises about wanting a partner, not an ornament. Who sold everything I owned to come here because I thought you saw me as more than just my height." She paused, gathering courage. "I'm also the kind who won't marry a man just to save his pride or my reputation, who won't make herself smaller so others feel bigger. If that makes me shameful, so be it." "You'll regret this," Harold said, but he was backing away. "When he tosses you out."
"Then I'll face that when it comes on my feet, not my knees."
The crowd parted as Harold retreated. Some faces showed disapproval, but others, like Sarah Winters, showed something that might have been respect. "We should go," Colt said quietly. As they drove out of town, Laney's hands shook with delayed reaction, standing up to Harold publicly. Claiming her choices in front of the whole town, it went against every lesson she'd been taught about feminine behavior. "You did good," Colt said after a while.
"Did I? I just made everything worse."
"No, you made it yours. There's a difference." He glanced at her. "Sarah Winters likes you. That counts for something. She's got influence with the other ranch wives. Because she's respectable. Because she's honest. Calls things what they are. People trust that, even when they don't like it." They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them. Finally, Laney asked the question that had been building all day. "Do you regret it taking me in your reputation? I spent 10 years building a reputation for keeping to myself and minding my business. If I lose it for helping someone who needed it, that's a trade I'll make." "But why, really why? It can't just be about your mother." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, you know what it's like, being too much for the world you're born into. Too tall, too quiet, too different. Spending your whole life trying to fit into spaces that weren't made for you." She nodded, throat tight. "Gets tiring. The fitting, the trying. Sometimes you just want to stop. Be what you are instead of what they want." He adjusted the reins, eyes on the horizon. "Saw you in that church, refusing to bend even when everything was broken. Thought maybe you were tired of fitting too." The cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney into the clear sky. Home, Laney thought, and didn't correct herself. Whatever happened next, whatever judgment the town passed, she'd made her choice. Not for Colt, not against Harold, but for herself. "Thank you," she said softly.
"For what?" "For seeing me. Not too tall or too much, just me."
He pulled the wagon up to the cabin, then turned to look at her fully. "That's all any of us want, isn't it, to be seen clear?" As they unloaded supplies together, working in easy partnership, Laney thought about Sarah Winters and her promise of mending, about standing up in the market square and claiming her choices, about Colt's quiet presence that asked nothing but offered everything. Maybe she'd lost her reputation today, but maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth more: the courage to stand tall in a world that wanted her to shrink. The snow began 3 days after market day, falling steady and thick, transforming the landscape into an endless white canvas. Colt worked through it, breaking ice on water troughs and hauling feed to the cattle, while Laney found herself measuring the boundaries of her new life in stitches and seams. Sarah Winters had been true to her word. She'd arrived the morning after market with a basket that seemed bottomless shirts with torn elbows, trousers with split seams, a child's dress that looked more patched than original fabric. Behind her came 2 more women, then another the following day, until Laney had enough work to keep her hands busy from dawn to dusk. "Don't mind if I work here a spell?" Sarah asked one afternoon, settling herself by the fire with her own mending. "Gets lonesome at my place with the children at school." It became a pattern. Women would arrive with their baskets, but they'd linger, sharing coffee and conversation while Laney worked. They spoke of practical things: preserving meat, managing livestock through winter, which merchants gave fair prices. Slowly, carefully, they were including her in the unspoken network that kept frontier life bearable. Colt watched it all with quiet satisfaction. "Building something," he said one evening, gesturing at the pile of completed mending. "Just earning my keep." "More than that, you're earning place." She understood what he meant a week later when young Mrs. Palmer, the banker's wife who'd pointedly ignored her at market, appeared at the door with a silk dress that needed alteration.
"I heard you do fine work,"
she said stiffly, not quite meeting Laney's eyes. I try. This was my mother's. It needs taking in, but I don't trust just anyone with silk. Laney examined the dress, good quality, but showing wear. The kind of treasure a frontier woman might own just one of, saved for special occasions. I can help. When do you need it? Christmas dance is in 3 weeks. After Mrs. Palmer left, Colt emerged from his workshop where he'd made himself scarce. Banker's wife coming here, that's something. She needs the dress altered, that's all. Maybe, maybe not. He hung his coat by the door, bringing in the smell of sawdust and snow. I've been thinking, this space isn't enough for proper sewing work. Laney looked around the cabin, which had indeed become crowded with baskets of mending, her small trunk of supplies, and the constant coming and going of women. It's fine. Could be better. He moved to the window, pointing toward the lean-to attached to the cabin's east wall. Been using that for storage, but it's sound. Good roof, solid walls, with a window cut in for light and a proper stove, make a decent workshop. Colt, no, you've done enough. Not charity. He interrupted. Investment. You're bringing in money with that needle. Makes sense to give you proper space to work. She stared at him, this taciturn man who spoke in actions more than words. Why? She asked softly. Why do you keep finding ways to make me stay? He was quiet for a long moment, hands busy with the coffee pot, though they'd finished supper an hour ago. You ever watch the land after first snow? He finally asked. How everything looks different, clean, like the world starting over. She nodded, not sure where this was going. That's what it's been like. Having you here, this place was starting to feel like a tomb. Just me and the ghosts of what I thought life would be. He set the pot down, still not looking at her. Then you showed up, tall and proud and ready to fight the world, and suddenly things felt possible again. What kind of things? He met her eyes then, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. But he just smiled slightly and said, good things, worth waiting for things. Over the next week, he transformed the storage lean-to with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, cut a window where the light was best, installed a small pot-bellied stove, built shelves and a proper cutting table from smoothed pine. Laney tried to help, but he waved her off. Your work is with the needle. This is mine. The day he finished, she stood in the doorway of her new workshop, throat tight with emotion. It wasn't large, maybe 8 feet by 10, but it was hers, a place designed specifically for her work. Her height, the cutting table built tall enough that she wouldn't have to stoop. Pegs for hanging fabric placed where she could reach without stretching. It's perfect, she whispered. It's practical, he corrected, but she could see the pleasure in his eyes at her reaction. That evening, as snow fell soft outside and she worked on Mrs. Palmer's silk dress in her new space, Colt read aloud from Whitman while she sewed. His voice was deep and measured, giving weight to words about containing multitudes, about the body electric, about the open road. Do you ever want that? She asked during a pause. The open road moving on. Used to, when I was younger. Thought freedom meant never staying still. He closed the book, marking his place with careful precision. Then I realized I was running from, not running to. There's a difference. What were you running from? Same as you, maybe expectations, the life others planned out for me. He stood, adding wood to the fire. My father wanted me to take over his shipping business in San Francisco. Couldn't see spending my life in ledgers and warehouses, so I lit out for the territories. Ended up here. Do you regret it? Did, for a while. Lonely life. Ranching. Then I figured out lonely and alone aren't the same thing. Could be lonely in a crowd if you're not seen true. Could be complete with just one person if they see you clear. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Laney focused on her stitching, aware of every sound, the fire crackling, Blue's contented snoring, Colt's steady breathing.
I should tell you, she said carefully. Harold came by yesterday, while you were in the north pasture.
Colt went still.
What did he want?
To warn me.
Said you had a woman once. Said she left because life out here was too hard, too isolated. Said I'd do the same.
That all he said?
He said...
She hesitated, then pushed on.
He said she left because you cared more about your books and your solitude than about making a life with someone.
Colt was quiet for so long she wondered if he'd answer. Then, her name was Margaret. Pretty thing, delicate as china. Met her in Denver. Thought I was in love. Brought her out here and watched her wilt like a flower in drought. She needed people, parties, society. I couldn't give her that. Did you love her?
Thought I did, but I loved the idea of her more than the reality, and she loved the idea of taming me more than who I was.
He turned from the fire, facing her.
Harold's right about one thing. I'm not an easy man, set in my ways. Value quiet over chatter, truth over nicety. That's not enough for most.
But it might be enough for some. Their eyes met across the small space, and something shifted between them, subtle but definite as the turn of seasons. Might be, he agreed softly. A knock at the door broke the moment. Colt answered it to find Tom Winters, Sarah's husband, hat in hand and face grim.
Sorry to bother, but Sarah sent me. The Palmer boy's gone missing. Took off after a fight with his father. And with this snow...
He gestured at the swirling white beyond the door.
We're gathering searchers.
Colt was already reaching for his coat.
How long,
3 hours, maybe 4. He's only 12, and dressed for town, not weather. I'll saddle up. Colt turned to Laney.
Keep the fires going. This could be a long night. I want to help.
You can. Sarah's organizing the women to make coffee and food for the searchers. They'll gather here since we're central. He paused at the door. And Laney misses. Palmer will need kindness more than gossip tonight. She nodded, understanding. This was frontier life stripped to essentials when crisis came. Old judgments fell away. There was only community and need. As Colt disappeared into the swirling snow, Laney set about preparing. Coffee in the large pot. The stew she'd made for supper reheated and stretched with water and vegetables. Her new workshop became a gathering place as women arrived, faces tight with worry.
Mrs.
Palmer came last. Her usual composed demeanor cracked. He's just 12. She kept saying, just 12. Laney guided her to a chair, pressed coffee into her shaking hands. Colt will find him. The men will find him.
I said awful things.
Mrs. Palmer whispered. About respectability, about what people would think. That's why he ran, because I care more about appearances than... She broke off, tears falling. Sarah Winters moved to comfort her, but it was Laney who misses. Palmer grabbed, surprising them both.
I judged you,
she said fiercely. Condemned you for choosing survival over propriety. But what's propriety worth if my son freezes because of it?
He won't,
Laney said firmly.
They'll find him.
The night wore on in coffee and prayers, in women who'd barely spoken to her now working beside her, united in purpose. When the men finally returned near dawn, young James Palmer wrapped in Colt's coat and carried in his arms, a collective cry went up. Found him holed up in the old mine shaft, Colt said, transferring the boy to his sobbing mother, cold and scared but whole. As the crowd dispersed, families reuniting, Laney found herself alone with Colt in the pre-dawn quiet. He was exhausted, ice in his hair, hands raw from cold. You found him, she said softly. We all found him. That's how it works out here. When real trouble comes, the rest falls away. She thought about that as she helped him out of his frozen coat, as she poured hot coffee into him and watched color return to his face. About community forged in crisis. About judgments that seemed so important until they weren't. about a boy saved because people put aside their differences. Mrs. Palmer apologized to me. She said, "Good. About time someone did." He caught her hand as she reached for his empty cup. "You did good tonight, taking care of everyone. It's what you do when people need help." "Yes," he said, still holding her hand. "It is." In the growing light, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but also something else, pride, maybe, or recognition, of what they were building here together, one small kindness at a time. "Your workshop," she said suddenly. "We tracked snow all through it. I should clean—" "Tomorrow," he said. "Everything can wait until tomorrow." As the sun crested the mountains, painting the snow-covered world in shades of rose and gold, Lainey thought he was right. Tomorrow was soon enough for cleaning, for returning to careful distances and proper boundaries. Today had been about something more essential about community claimed through service, about belonging earned through action rather than appearance. And if Colt's hand lingered in hers a moment longer than necessary, if something new had sparked between them in the long night's vigil, well, that could wait for tomorrow too. For now, it was enough to stand together in the warming light. Two tall people who'd found their place by making room for others. The whispers started at the Christmas dance. Lainey hadn't planned to attend, but Mrs. Palmer had insisted when she came to collect her altered silk dress. "You must come," she'd said, pressing Lainey's hands. "After what you did that night, helping with James, I won't hear of you staying away." So Lainey found herself in her best dress, a deep green wool she'd sewn herself, standing at the edge of the decorated barn, while fiddle music filled the air. Colt stood beside her, uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes, but solid as always. A steady presence in the swirl of motion and color. "Don't often see you at these gatherings. Mercer," Judge Morton observed, approaching with his wife. He was a fair man who'd treated them civilly at market, but his tone carried curiosity. "Don't often have reason to come," Colt replied evenly. "And now you do, Mrs." Morton's eyes flickered between them, bright with speculation. "Now I do." It was such a simple statement, but Lainey felt its weight. The judge's wife smiled knowingly and moved on, but others weren't so subtle. She caught fragments of conversation, whispers that carried over the music. "Living there for weeks now. Says she's sewing, but really. A woman like that, what else would she be doing? Poor Colt, doesn't know what he's gotten himself into." The words stung, each one a small cut. Lainey kept her head high, but she could feel herself withdrawing, shrinking back toward the wall. Then Colt's hand touched her elbow. "Dance with me." She looked at him, startled. "You dance?" "Badly, but I do." He held out his hand, waiting. Taking it meant stepping into the center of the barn, into the light where everyone could see. It meant claiming publicly what had so far remained private, that whatever existed between them was more than convenience or charity. She took his hand. He hadn't lied about dancing badly. His steps were careful, measured, like he was counting in his head. But his hand was warm on her waist, and for once, she didn't have to bend or shrink. They were matched in height, moving together through the simple patterns of a frontier waltz. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them." "They're talking about us, about what I must be doing to keep you interested." His hand tightened on hers. "They're small people with small thoughts. What they think matters less than dust." "It matters if it hurts your reputation, your business. My business is cattle and horses. Last I checked, neither cared much for gossip." He guided her through a turn, then added quietly, "You want to leave?" She thought about it, the warmth of the barn against the cold outside, the way Sarah Winters had smiled when they took the floor, the fact that for the first time in her life, she was dancing with a man who didn't make her feel oversized. "No, I want to finish this dance." "Good." They stayed for 2 more sets, then made their excuses. The ride home was quiet, the night crisp and clear. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns that seemed both ancient and immediate. "Thank you," Lainey said as they pulled up to the cabin. "For dancing, for not caring what they said." "I cared," Colt corrected, helping her down from the wagon. "Just not the way they think." Inside, as she hung up her good dress and he stoked the fire, the evening felt suspended between them like a question neither quite knew how to ask. Finally, as she bid him good night and turned toward her curtained corner, he spoke. "Lainey." She turned back. He stood by the fire, shadows playing across his face, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "I'm not good with words, not the kind that matter, but I need you to know what they were saying tonight about why you're here, why I let you stay. They're wrong." "I know that." "Do you?" He moved closer, still careful, still maintaining that respectful distance he always kept. "Because I need to be clear, you're not here because I want something from you. You're here because—" He paused, struggling. "Because you make sense. In a world that mostly doesn't, you make sense." Her breath caught. "Colt." "I don't need an answer. Don't need anything to change. Just needed you to know that what's between us, whatever it is or isn't or might be, it's honest. It's not what they're making it with their whispers." She crossed the space between them before she could think better of it, taking his hands in hers. They were calloused, strong, careful. "I know who you are," she said softly. "I've known since that first night. A lesser man would have left me in that church. A different man would have expected payment for kindness. You're neither of those." "What am I then?" She thought about it. This man who read poetry in the evenings and built her a workshop without being asked, who stood beside her at dances and in market squares, solid as the mountains themselves. "You're home," she said simply. "Somehow, you've become home." Something shifted in his face, a vulnerability quickly mastered. "That's a dangerous thing to say to a man like me." "Why?" "Because I might believe it. Might start thinking this is real, permanent. Might forget you're only here until you figure out something better." "What if I already have?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. But before either could take that step, hoofbeats sounded outside. Fast, urgent, too late for casual visitors. Colt reached for his rifle, but Lainey recognized the rider through the window. "It's Tom Winters." They met him at the door. His face was grim, breath coming hard. "Sorry to disturb, but there's been trouble. Harold Boone's been spreading stories in town. Says he's got proof about improper behavior here." "What kind of proof?" Colt's voice was dangerously quiet. "Says he's been watching, has witnesses who've seen things through windows." Tom's discomfort was obvious. "He's demanding a town meeting. Wants Lainey run out for moral corruption." "That's ridiculous," Lainey started, but Tom held up his hand. "I know that. Sarah knows that. Most folks with sense know that. But Boone's got the preacher worked up, and some of the town wives who never liked, well," he looked at Lainey apologetically, "who never liked a woman standing tall. They're listening." "When?" Colt asked. "Tomorrow night. Called for a proper hearing at the church." Tom shifted his weight. "Colt, I've known you for years. Know you're a good man, but this could get ugly. Might be better if Miss Lainey—" "If Miss Lainey what?" Colt's tone could have frozen flame. "Ranhid gave them the satisfaction of driving her out." "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying, and I know you mean well, but running gives them power, makes their lies look like truth." Tom nodded slowly. "Then you'll both be there." "We'll be there." After Tom left, they stood in the doorway, looking out at the night. The stars that had seemed so beautiful an hour ago now felt cold, distant. "He's been watching the house," Lainey said quietly. "Spying through windows. What could he have seen that—" "Nothing, because there's been nothing to see." Colt closed the door firmly. "But that won't matter to people who want to believe the worst." "I should leave."
before the meeting. If I'm gone. If you're gone, they win. He turned to face her. Is that what you want, to let Harold Boone and his spite drive you out? I want you safe, your reputation intact. My reputation? He laughed, short and bitter. My reputation is that I'm odd, unsociable, too fond of books and solitude. Adding defends good women from small-minded fools to the list won't hurt much. This is serious. Colt, they could make things difficult for you. Your business. We'll survive. I've weathered worse than gossip. He moved to the fire, staring into the flames. Question is, what do you want to do? I'll stand with you either way, but it has to be your choice. Lainey thought about the whispers at the dance, the looks that followed her through town, thought about Harold's spite and the preacher's judgment and all the proper wives who'd prefer her gone. Then she thought about Sarah Winters's friendship, Mrs. Palmer's gratitude, the workshop Colt had built with his own hands. I want to stay, she said quietly. I want to face them. He turned from the fire, and something in his expression made her heart skip. Then we face them, together. Together, she agreed. They prepared for bed in unusual silence, both aware that tomorrow would bring a reckoning. As Lainey lay in the dark, listening to the wind against the windows, she wondered what Harold thought he'd seen, what normal, innocent moments had been twisted by his watching into something shameful. But more than that, she wondered what would happen after tomorrow. Win or lose, stand or fall, something would be finished. The careful balance they'd maintained, the unspoken understanding that kept them at arm's length, it couldn't survive this kind of scrutiny. Through the curtain, she could hear Colt moving restlessly, unable to sleep either. She wanted to go to him, to offer comfort or seek it, but that would give Harold's lies truth they didn't deserve. So she stayed where she was, alone in the dark, preparing for a battle she'd never wanted to fight. Colt, she called softly. Yeah. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm glad. For all of it. For you finding me that night. For everything since. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, so am I. The wind picked up, rattling the windows like something trying to get in. But inside, the cabin was warm and safe for one more night. At least, tomorrow would bring accusation and judgment, the full weight of a town's narrow morality. But tonight, they were still just two people who'd found an unexpected home in each other's company. Two tall people who'd learned that standing straight was easier when you weren't standing alone. Tomorrow, they'd prove it to everyone else. The church was packed when they arrived, every pew filled, people standing along the walls, the air thick with anticipation and judgment. Lainey had worn her best dress, the blue wool from New York, and kept her chin high as they walked down the center aisle. Conversations died as they passed, replaced by a silence heavy with speculation. Harold Boone stood at the front beside Reverend Pritchard, chest puffed with self-importance. He dressed in his finest suit, hair slicked back, looking every inch the righteous citizen defending moral order. His eyes found Lainey's and held triumphant. Shall we begin? Reverend Pritchard's thin voice carried over the assembly. We're gathered here to address serious concerns about propriety and Christian behavior in our community. Judge Morton stood from his front pew. Reverend, with respect, this isn't a trial. We have no authority to— We have moral authority, Harold interrupted. The authority of decent folks to say what we will and won't tolerate. Then speak your piece. Boone, the judge said coolly. But remember, false witness is a sin too. Harold stepped forward, pulling papers from his jacket. I have here sworn statements, testimony about what's been happening at the Mercer Ranch, about a woman living there unwed, carrying on in ways that shame our entire town. Carrying on how— Exactly, Sarah Winters called from her seat. Sewing mending your torn breeches, that's shameful now. Titters rippled through the crowd, but Harold pressed on. Jim Hawkins saw them through the kitchen window.
standing close, talking intimate-like. Talking. Judge Morton's eyebrow rose. That's your evidence of corruption conversation. At night, alone, her in her nightclothes. Colt stood slowly, his movement drawing every eye. Jim Hawkins, the same Jim Hawkins who got drunk and tried to peek in windows at the widow Carson's place last summer. Hawkins, a weasel-faced man near the back, turned red. That ain't I never. Sheriff McKay caught you, made you spend 3 nights in jail. Colt's voice was calm, factual. Man who spies on widows probably spies on others too. That your witness, Boone. Harold's jaw worked. There's more. She goes to town, flaunts herself. Buys supplies. Misses. Palmer interrupted. Standing. Delivers the work she's done. I've employed her myself. Her conduct has been nothing but professional. You would say that. Mrs. Pritchard sniffed from her position beside her husband. After she helped with your boy. But the rest of us see clear. A woman like that. Too tall, too bold. Living with a man who ain't her husband. A woman like what? Laney stood, finally unable to remain silent. Say it plain. Mrs. Pritchard. What kind of woman am I? The Reverend's wife flushed. The kind who doesn't know her place. Who stands when she should sit. Who takes up space meant for men. Laney moved to the aisle, where she could face the assembly. For smaller women, for people who fit your narrow idea of proper. You admit you're living with him unwed, Harold burst out, standing there bold as brass. I'm standing here, accused. Laney's voice carried clear and strong. By a man who courted me for 6 months, promised me a life, then rejected me for being tall, who left me stranded in a snowstorm with nowhere to go. That don't give you the right to what accept kindness from the only person who offered it to work for honest pay. She turned, addressing the crowd. How many of you have worn clothes I mended? How many of your children was that shameful? It's not the sewing, Reverend Pritchard interjected. It's the arrangement, living under his roof, tempting a good man. Tempting. Colt's laugh was sharp. Reverend, you've known me 10 years. When have I ever been tempted by anything but a good book and strong coffee? Men change when women. Stop. Colt moved to stand beside Laney. Just stop. You want to know what happens in my house? I'll tell you. She cooks. I chop wood. We read in the evenings poetry, newspapers, whatever's to hand. We talk about books, weather, which cow's likely to calve first. She sleeps in the bed. I sleep in the barn. You expect us to believe? I expect you to mind your own business. His voice hardened. But since you won't, here's more truth. Yes, she lives under my roof, because turning her out would have been cruel. Yes, we've become friends, because she's worth knowing. Yes, I care what happens to her, because I'm not made of stone. So you admit. I admit nothing that needs admitting. He faced Harold directly. You know what I see here, a bitter man who can't stand that the woman he rejected is thriving, who can't bear that she found welcome where he offered none. I offered to marry her, Harold protested. After she'd been living with you, to save her reputation, to save your conscience. Laney corrected, because seeing me happy without you stings your pride. Happy, Mrs. Pritchard's voice dripped disdain. Ruined is what you are. No decent man will have you now. Then I'll be ruined. Laney lifted her chin. If the price of decency is marrying a man who measures my worth in inches, I'll pay gladly. Blasphemy, the Reverend thundered. A woman should be modest, humble, human. Judge Morton interrupted, rising again. A woman should be human, and humans need shelter, work, dignity. Colt Mercer offered all 3 when this town offered judgment. He looked around the packed church. Who here hasn't benefited from his help sometime when the bridge washed out? Who organized the rebuilding when the Hendersons' barn burned?
who was first with lumber and labor. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, remembering. And who here hasn't worn something Miss Wilder mended, fixed proper, and priced fair? Sarah Winters stood beside her husband. My Jim says half the ranch hands are dressed better since she came. That's not the point, Harold began. What is the point? Tom Winters asked. That she's tall, that she won't shrink herself small to make you feel big, that she chose dignity over your grudging offer. The point is propriety. Reverend Pritchard slammed his hand on the pulpit. The Bible says to love thy neighbor. A quiet voice interrupted. Old Mrs. Chen, who rarely spoke at gatherings, stood slowly. Says to shelter the stranger, feed the hungry. Where does it say to cast out women for being tall? Nervous laughter flickered through the assembly. This is ridiculous, Harold exploded. You're all being fooled. She's using him. Can't you see that woman like her? No prospects, no family, of course she'd latch on to the first man who... The crack of Colt's fist against Harold's jaw was loud in the confined space. Harold stumbled back, hand to his face, blood seeping between his fingers. That's enough, Colt said quietly. You've said your piece, told your lies, made your accusations. Now listen good. He stepped forward, and Harold backed away. Lainey Wilder is under my protection. Not because she's weak, but because it's right. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me, personally. The threat hung in the air. Colt Mercer might be quiet, might prefer books to brawls, but everyone knew his reputation. Fair but formidable. Not a man to cross lightly. You'd fight for her, Harold asked through his fingers. Risk everything for a woman who's not even yours. I'd fight for anyone treated unjust, but her... Colt glanced at Lainey, something soft flickering across his features. Her I'd fight for regardless. Because you love her. It wasn't a question. Harold's voice was bitter, defeated. The church went utterly still. Lainey's breath caught. Colt stood quiet for a long moment. Then, because she deserves better than your spite. It wasn't the answer anyone expected. Not a denial, not a confirmation, just a simple statement of worth. But Lainey heard what he didn't say, saw it in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he didn't look at her. I think we're done here, Judge Morton said into the silence. Unless anyone has actual evidence of wrongdoing, not gossip, not speculation, but evidence, I suggest we adjourn. But, Reverend Pritchard started. Reverend, I'd remind you that bearing false witness is a serious matter, as is pride, envy, and wrath. Seems to me there's plenty of sin to go around without inventing more. People began to file out, some shooting dark looks at Lainey and Colt, others nodding support. Sarah Winters squeezed Lainey's hand as she passed. Mrs., Palmer murmured. Well done, even old Mrs. Chen patted her arm with a knowing smile. Harold stood abandoned at the front, blood still seeping from his nose. This isn't over, he said as they passed. You've made a mistake. Mercer, both of you have. The only mistake, Colt said quietly, was you thinking height mattered more than heart. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and cleansing. They walked to the wagon in silence, aware of eyes watching from windows, conversations resuming behind doors. You hit him, Lainey said finally. He had it coming. You risked your reputation, your standing in town. Worth it. Colt, don't... He helped her into the wagon, his hands gentle despite the violence of moments before. Don't apologize for being defended. Don't shrink from being valued. That's what they want for you, to make yourself smaller so they feel justified in their smallness. As they drove out of town, snow swirling in the wagon lights, Lainey thought about Harold's accusation, the word he'd thrown like a weapon, love. Colt hadn't denied it, hadn't confirmed it either. But something had shifted tonight, some careful balance disrupted. What happens now? She asked. Now, he glanced at her, snowflakes catching in his hair. Now we go home. Tomorrow, you'll have mending to do. I'll have cattle to tend. Life goes on. That's simple. That's simple. But his hands were tight on the reins, and she could see the cost of the evening in the tension of his jaw. Unless you want complicated. She thought about it, the careful distance they'd maintained, the unspoken boundaries that kept them safe, all of it shattered by Harold's spite and a single word, love. I want honest, she said finally. He nodded slowly. Then honest is what we'll have. When we're ready. When the dust settles and we can see clear. The cabin appeared through the snow, windows glowing warm with the fire Blue had kept tended. Home, she thought, and didn't question it anymore. Whatever came next, gossip, judgment, or something sweeter, they'd face it as they'd faced tonight. Together, standing tall, refusing to shrink. As Colt helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered a moment longer than necessary. You did good tonight, speaking up, standing firm. I learned from the best. His smile was small but real. We make a good team. Yes, she agreed, thinking of all the unspoken words hovering between them like snow waiting to fall. We do. The ice gave way without warning. One moment Colt was leading his horse across what looked like solid ground near the frozen stream. The next there was a sharp crack and he was falling. The horse scrambled back, but Colt's weight broke through completely, plunging him into water so cold it stole his breath. He managed to grab the edge, but the current pulled at his legs, and when he tried to haul himself up, a searing pain shot through his shoulder. His head struck something, a rock, ice. He couldn't tell, and the world tilted sideways. Easy, Duke, easy, he heard himself say to the panicked horse, though his voice sounded strange and distant. He needed to get out, knew the danger of water this cold, but his limbs weren't responding right. The edges of his vision grew dark. The last thing he remembered was Duke's frantic whinnying and the taste of copper in his mouth. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Lainey was finishing Mrs. Henderson's quilt when she heard the horse. Not the steady clop of Colt returning from checking the herd, but something wild, frightened. She looked out to see Duke, Colt's bay gelding, riderless and foam-flecked, pawing at the cabin door. Her heart stopped. Where is he, boy? She grabbed her shawl. Following the agitated horse, Duke kept circling back, leading her on. And she ran despite the snow, despite her house shoes soaking through. She found him half in the water, half out, unconscious and pale as the snow around him. Blood seeped from a gash on his temple. No, no, no! She grabbed under his arms, heaving with strength born of desperation. He was heavy, waterlogged, but she managed to drag him fully onto solid ground. His lips were blue, his breathing shallow. Colt, you have to help me, she pleaded, trying to lift him. Please! Somehow, she'd never know quite how she got him onto Duke's back, holding him in place as she led the horse home. Her hands were numb, her dress soaked with icy water and his blood. But she didn't stop until they reached the cabin. Getting him inside took everything she had. She dragged him to the rug before the fire, fingers shaking as she worked at the buttons of his frozen coat. Don't you dare, she muttered, pulling off his wet clothes with desperate efficiency, wrapping him in every blanket she could find. Don't you dare leave me here alone. She built the fire up until it roared, heated water for bottles to pack around him, pressed clean cloth to the wound on his head. His skin was ice cold, his breathing too shallow. She'd seen men die from cold like this, seen them slip away even after they were brought inside. Please, she whispered, chafing his hands between hers. Please. Hours passed in a blur of checking his breathing, changing the compress on his head, keeping the fire high. She talked to him nonsense mostly, about the mending she needed to finish, about how Blue had stolen bacon that morning, about anything that might reach him wherever he'd gone. You promised, she told his still form. You promised I'd never be unwanted here.
Well, I need you to wake up and be grumpy about me fussing. Need you to tell me I'm doing everything wrong. Night fell. She couldn't leave him to fetch the doctor. Moving him again might kill him, and she couldn't lift him to the bed alone. So she stayed on the floor beside him, monitoring each breath, terrified each one would be the last. Sometime near midnight, he stirred. Just a flutter of eyelids, a slight movement of fingers. Colt, she leaned close. Can you hear me? His eyes opened, unfocused. Cold, he whispered. I know, but you're safe. You're home. Tears she hadn't realized were falling dripped onto his blanket. You fell through the ice. Duke brought me to you. Smart horse. His voice was thread-thin. Head hurts. You hit it. There's a cut, but it's not too deep. She smoothed hair back from his forehead with trembling fingers. You scared me. Sorry. He tried to focus on her face. You're crying. Of course I'm crying, you foolish man. I thought... Her voice broke. I thought I'd lost you. Something shifted in his expression, a clearing despite the pain. Laney, don't talk. Rest, get warm. No, need to... He struggled to sit up, gasping at the movement. She pressed him back down. Whatever it is can wait. Can't wait. Been waiting too long already. His hand found hers, grip weak but determined. What Harold said at the church about love. Colt, please. He was right. The words hung between them, fragile as frost. Laney's heart hammered against her ribs. I didn't want him to be right. Colt continued, each word an effort. Didn't plan on it, but somewhere between you organizing my books and standing up to the whole town... He squeezed her hand. Harold was right. I love you. Not polite or convenient or proper. Just true. You're hurt, confused. When you're better. When I'm better, I'll still love you. His eyes, clearer now, held hers. Been trying not to. Figured you deserve better than a hermit rancher with more books than sense. But lying here, thinking I might not get another chance. He drew a shaky breath. A man should say what's true while he can. Laney couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. All those careful boundaries, all that respectful distance, none of it mattered now with him lying hurt and honest on her floor. Say something, he whispered. Even if it's that I'm a fool. You are a fool, she managed. A wonderful, infuriating fool who nearly died rather than admit feelings. She brought his hand to her lips, kissed the scarred knuckles. And I love you too. Have for weeks. Maybe since that first night when you offered me cornbread and didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. His smile was weak but real. We're a pair. Aren't we both too proud to speak plain? Not anymore, she said fiercely. No more careful distance. No more sleeping in the barn. When you're well... When I'm well, I'm going to court you proper. Take you to town on my arm. Dance with you at every social. Even though I'm terrible at it. His eyes were drifting closed again. Make sure everyone knows Laney Wilder chose me. And I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming because of it. Rest now, she murmured. We have time for the rest? Stay with me. Always. She held his hand as he slipped back into sleep, true sleep this time, not the frightening unconsciousness of before. The fire crackled. Blue snored in his corner. And outside, snow continued to fall. But inside, something new had been born from fear and honesty, a future no longer held at arm's length. Through the night she kept watch, adding wood to the fire, checking his breathing, his temperature. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold. Colt's color had improved. The wound on his head had stopped seeping, and his skin felt warmer. Water, he croaked, attempting to sit up. She helped him drink, supported his weight. In the morning light, she could see the bruises blooming across his shoulder and ribs. How bad is the pain? Had worse, breaking horses, mostly.
He caught her worried look. I'll heal, thanks to you. Thanks to Duke, he came for help. Extra oats for that horse for life. He shifted, wincing. Help me to the chair, floor's getting old. Together, they managed to get him into the rocking chair by the fire. She fussed with blankets, pillows, trying to make him comfortable. Lainey. He caught her hand, stilling her nervous movement. I meant it. What I said, not just fever talk. I know. She knelt beside the chair, their faces level. I meant it too. Then why do you look scared? She thought about how to explain it, the fear that had driven her all night. Not just of losing him to the cold, but of having something precious enough to lose. My whole life, I've been too much, too tall, too strong, too independent. Men wanted me smaller, quieter, less. She met his eyes. You're the first person who wanted me exactly as I am. If I lost that, you won't. He cupped her face with one hand, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Know why? She shook her head. Because you're not too much. You're exactly enough. Just right for a man who spent so long alone, he'd forgotten why he was waiting. He leaned his forehead against hers. I nearly died yesterday. Know what I regretted most? That I'd been too careful to tell you that you're my whole heart. That this cabin only feels like home when you're in it. Colt. Let me finish. I'm not good at pretty words. But I need you to hear this. He pulled back to look at her fully. I love that you stand tall. Love that you speak your mind. Love that you can haul a grown man out of frozen water and still have fight left for anyone who says you shouldn't. Don't want you smaller, quieter, or less. Want you exactly as you are. For as long as you'll have me. The tears came freely now, but they were clean tears, healing tears. Forever, she whispered. I'll have you forever. Good. He smiled, exhaustion pulling at him again. Now maybe you should fetch Doc Emmett. Make sure my head's not more scrambled than usual. Will you be all right alone? Blue'll watch me. Go. He squeezed her hand. But come back quick. Got a lifetime to plan, and I want to start now. She kissed him then, careful of his injuries but sure of her heart. When she pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that looked like joy. Hurry back, he said softly. I'll be here. Promise. Promise. Where else would I go? This is home. As she prepared for the ride to town, bundling against the cold, Lainey marveled at how much could change in a single night. Yesterday they'd been careful friends, maintaining proper distance. Today they were something new, two people who'd found their match in height and heart and stubbornness. She looked back from the doorway. Colt sat by the fire, Blue at his feet, looking battered but whole, alive. Hers. I love you, she said, just to hear the words in daylight. His smile was answer enough. The ride to town had never seemed shorter. Her heart had never been fuller. And for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Lainey Wilder knew exactly where she belonged. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the world. Ice gave way to rushing water. Brown earth emerged from white snow, and the first green shoots pushed through soil that had seemed forever frozen. The cabin, which had felt like a shelter against winter's siege, now opened its doors to warming breezes and the sound of returning birds. Colt had healed well, though he still moved carefully on cold mornings. The scar on his temple had faded to a thin white line, a reminder. Lainey said, of the day everything changed. They'd settled into a new rhythm, one without the careful distances of before. He no longer slept in the barn. She no longer hesitated to touch his hand over morning coffee. The town might whisper, but inside their small world, everything felt right. Been thinking, Colt said one morning, watching her work in her sewing room. Business had grown through the winter, and she now had orders backed up for weeks. Dangerous habit, she replied, not looking up from the delicate embroidery she was adding to a christening gown. About that first night,
when you asked what you feared most. Her hands stilled. They'd talked about many things through the long winter evenings, but rarely circled back to those first fragile days. You said your first night, being unwanted. He moved to stand behind her, hands gentle on her shoulders. Still afraid of that. She set down her needle, turning to face him. In the morning light streaming through the window he'd cut for her, his face was clear, open, all the careful walls gone. "No," she said simply. "That fear's gone." "What replaced it?" She considered, "Maybe that I'll wake up, that this is too good to last, that someone like me doesn't get this kind of happiness." "Someone like you. Too tall, too strong, too much." He pulled her to her feet, and even standing, she only had to tilt her head slightly to meet his eyes. "Let me tell you about someone like you," he said quietly. "Someone like you saves drowning men, stands up to entire towns, makes homes out of empty houses. Someone like you is exactly who I waited 35 years to find. Colt, I have something for you." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. "Meant to wait for the town social tonight, but patience isn't my strongest virtue." Inside the pouch was a ring. Not fancy. Colt wasn't a fancy man, but perfect. A simple gold band with a small sapphire, the color of her favorite dress. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "She was tall, too. Grandpa had to stand on a stump to propose." His mouth quirked. "I figured I'd spare us that indignity." Lainey stared at the ring, throat tight. "Are you asking you to marry me?" "Yes." He took her hands, the ring warm between their palms. "I know it's only been a few months. Know the town still gossips. Know you could probably do better than a rancher who reads too much and talks too little. But, yes." "I promise to what?" "Yes," she laughed, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, to all of it. To you. To this life. To forever." His smile transformed his face. "Years falling away. You're sure the isolation, the hard work, the—" She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her certainty into it. When they broke apart, both breathless, she held out her hand. "The ring, Colt, before you talk yourself out of it." He slipped it on her finger with hands that trembled slightly. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her. "Tonight," he said, "at the social. We'll tell everyone. Make it official." "They'll talk?" "Let them. They'll talk themselves tired eventually." He pulled her close. "Besides, some will be happy for us. Sarah Winters has been dropping hints for weeks." That evening, they dressed in their best her green wool, his rarely worn suit. As they prepared to leave for town, Lainey caught sight of them in the small mirror by the door. They looked right together, she thought, matched not just in height but in something deeper. Two people who'd found their way through loneliness to each other. The church hall was decorated with early wildflowers, fiddle music already spilling into the street. When they entered, conversations faltered briefly, then resumed with added intensity. But this time, Lainey noticed. Not all the looks were hostile. Mrs. Palmer smiled warmly. Judge Morton nodded approval. Even some who'd condemned her before seemed softened by time and familiarity. "Ready," Colt murmured. "With you always." They made their way through the crowd, greeting neighbors, accepting congratulations from friends who'd already noticed the ring. When the music called for dancing, Colt led her onto the floor without hesitation. "You've been practicing," she accused as he guided her through the steps with newfound confidence. "Sarah's been teaching me. Said it was about time I learned to dance proper with my future wife." Future wife. The word sent warmth through her chest. Halfway through the dance, Harold Boone appeared at the edge of the floor. Lainey tensed, but Colt's hand was steady on her waist. "Congratulations," Harold said stiffly when the music paused. "I heard the news." "Thank you," Colt replied, tone neutral. Harold's jaw worked.
Then he looked directly at Lainey. "I was wrong. About all of it." The words seemed to pain him. "You weren't too tall. I was too small. In spirit. I hope you'll be happy." Before either could respond, he melted back into the crowd. Lainey stared after him, stunned. "People change," Colt said quietly. "Sometimes for the better." "Do you think he meant it?" "Does it matter? We know what's true. The rest is just noise." They danced until the musicians took a break, then stepped outside for air. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead. In the distance, mountains rose like promises against the sky. "No regrets?" Colt asked, arms around her as they looked out at the vast landscape that would be their shared future. "None." She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "This is home. Your home." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Because I plan to spend the next 50 years proving you right." "Only 50? "To start, we'll negotiate after that." She laughed, turning in his arms. "I love you, Colt Mercer. Love this life we're building. Love that you see me clear and want me anyway." "Not anyway," he corrected. "Because I want you because you're strong. Because you stand tall. Because you saved me in more ways than just pulling me from that ice." He cupped her face in his hands. "Because you're exactly enough, exactly right, exactly mine." "Yours," she agreed. "And you're mine." "For as long as you'll have me." "Forever. Then, forever." They sealed the promise with a kiss there under the stars. Two tall people who'd found that the perfect fit wasn't about height or size or meeting others' expectations. It was about finding someone who saw you whole and chose you complete too much and not enough, and exactly right all at once. Behind them, music started up again, but they stayed outside a moment longer, holding each other in the vast Wyoming night. Tomorrow would bring work cattle to tend, clothes to mend, a life to build together. There would be challenges, certainly, hard winters and dry summers, gossiping tongues and the isolation of ranch life. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Lainey Wilder stood in the arms of the man who'd offered her shelter and given her home, who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her at her strongest, who'd promised her forever and meant it. "Ready to go back in?" he asked. "Face the world as an engaged couple?" "With you," she smiled up at him, only slightly up. Wonderfully, perfectly up. "I'm ready for anything." They walked back into the light and music and curious faces, hand in hand, hearts aligned. Fear replaced by certainty. The first night she'd feared being unwanted, alone, too much for anyone to love. Now she knew the truth. She was wanted, cherished, exactly enough for the man beside her. And that was more than enough. It was everything. As they joined the dancing again, Lainey caught sight of them in the window's reflection, two tall figures moving in harmony, no longer trying to shrink or apologize for the space they took up in the world. They'd found their place, their match, their home in each other. The girl who'd sat freezing in an abandoned church, abandoned by a man who thought her too tall, had become a woman who stood proud beside a man who wouldn't have her any other way. And if that wasn't a proper happy ending for a Wild West love story, Lainey couldn't imagine what was. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Lainey and Colt's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world this story is reaching and hear your thoughts about their romance. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover these frontier love stories. Your support means everything. Until our next adventure in the Old West, partners.